Hello, everybody. How y'all doing? This is EJ Burt, host of Arena Goat Talk, bringing on the legends of this game, letting them tell their story and give you some advice along the way. So on this next episode, I have former executive of the year and one of the key players, to help get this thing going, Mr. Gino Nudo. How you doing today, sir?
Good, EJ. How are you?
I'm good. I appreciate you coming on and spending your time and, telling me, help share your story and help to enlighten some, a lot of people about this game. There's so many pieces I feel are missing that people don't know. And I definitely would love for you to kind of share some of those things with everybody.
Well, I love talking about arena football. It was a big part of my life for a long time. I mean, I got started from day one back in 1987. And it was an exciting time. I had a chance to rub elbows with some great football people, really helped further my career. And I never really felt like I had a job. I was, doing what I love to do around wonderful people, wonderful players, relatively very good ownership. I got very lucky. I'm one of the few guys that say that. But it was a pleasure. And, talk about Hall of Fame. I had so many Hall of Fame players. My first year in Arizona in '95, I signed 3 guys that wound up going to the Hall of Fame. Bob McMillan was a Hall of Famer. Aaron Garcia, we signed in Arizona. And, we wound up, he's a Hall of Famer, we wound up trading him for a center to Connecticut. Joe Birch, another great player. And then Randy Gatewood, we signed that first year also in '95. But so, right place, right time with the right people.
Mm-hmm. That's why you're a Hall of Famer yourself, making those big time decisions.
Well, a little bit of luck also.
So let's kind of get into your story. So kind of tell us, where you're from and, let's start to get into your how you were introduced to the AFL and kind of those, to start to, break that story down from there.
Well, back in 1986, I grew up in Chicago, and Jim Foster lived in the northern suburbs of Chicago, and he had this idea about indoor football, and they reached out to me about, I was coaching a semi-pro team, the River Grove Cowboys, and we were the national champions in 1984. So he wanted to use some of our players to start looking at stuff. We were out of Triton College. We put a piece of adhesive tape on the middle of the football field. It was an AstroTurf field. And myself and Ray Yock and some other guys, we were looking at different ways to play this game with 8 men, 7 men, free substitution, Ironman football. Really, the Ironman football was the underlying theme in everything that we did. Mm-hmm. So we played a preview game in 1986. In Rockford, Illinois, and we had about 1,500 people show up. We were going to play half a game just to get something on film, and the fans wouldn't let us stop playing. I mean, it was, they were going crazy, and it was loud, and it was, I mentioned this before, it's like being on the ice at a hockey game when a fight breaks out. Mm-hmm. People were like bloodthirsty, they loved it. So it went so well that they decided to play another game in Rosemont. Rosemont back then was the Horizon. And we had 8,000 people show up. It benefited Misericordia, which was a home for children and people with illness. And it worked out great. The game went down to the last seconds, and it was the Chicago, Miami Vice against the Chicago Politicians. Something like that. So, but we had cowboy uniforms. They put a big sticker on the side of the helmet that said arena on it. And so we played the game. It looked great. ESPN was there that night. They decided they wanted to go forward with it in 1987. And we played a preview season. It was a 6-game season with 4 teams, Chicago and Washington and Pittsburgh and Denver. And really went very well. And after that season, it was funny because we were talking. I was talking recently. Lee Corso did the color that season, and here he is now. He's retiring from doing college football, and everybody talks about poor Lee Corso, but man, he was an entertaining guy, and he would be out there before the games trying to catch balls off the nets. He was probably 50 back then. A little bit older, but so we played a 12-game season in '88 with 6 teams. And we wound up, Chicago, we wound up losing to Detroit, Tim Markham and his Detroit Drive. They were a pretty good ball club. So, and that's how my arena football career really started. I went into the league office in 1990 and became the vice president of vice president of player personnel. And I was there for 5 years, and we kind of cleaned up the rules and when you could sign a guy and when you couldn't, and when you could make a trade, and then the playing rules of the game. And there were so many of them, and you don't realize, but if you change this, what happens if this happens? So you're always trying to clean things up. But I had really an invaluable learning experience being in the league office. The supervisor of officials, Carl Paganelli, who has 3 sons in the NFL for many, many years. He reported to me, and the league started to really grow. After 5 years there, the Arizona Rattlers hired me. And Jerry Colangelo, who owned the Rattlers, and his son Brian, who ran the Rattlers. Brian was about to become the GM of the Phoenix Suns. And they asked me to come out to Arizona and basically run the team along with Danny White, who was the head coach. And they had a real good nucleus. They had just won the championship in '94. And so in '95, I went to Arizona, and I'm still in Arizona now. I've had I bounced a little bit, but they were a great organization under Colangelo's ownership. And our players had the best housing, the best food. We had great practice facilities. We practiced and we had our own stadium, the old Sun Stadium, which was still the Veterans Coliseum. So it was great. It was great. We had assistant coaches like Kevin Thomas and Bruce Hardy, Doug Plank. We just had some great guys, and but the players, you put Hunky Cooper as a leader in any team you have, and then Cedric Bonner and Randy Gatewood and Bob McMillan was with us back then. Darren Kenny was with us back then, and so you look at all those guys, and coupled with guys that had Durwood Rockmore played for us in Chicago. And I know he was legendary. Everybody remembers him in Orlando, but he started with us in Chicago. And I'm just looking at notes I have. Ben Bennett was our quarterback in Chicago, and he wound up winning a championship in Orlando. And Ben's a character now. And he might be calling in. You never know. But so for me, it was just a great, great time. I became the head coach of the Rattlers my last 2 years there, and probably a bad career move for me, but I've been there for so long, and I sold this product for so long. And the owner, our previous coach, had let's just say misbehaved, and the owner wanted to keep it going that way. So. I was a young coach with older players, and not a good recipe. But the players, to their credit, were very loyal to me. We just didn't win. So that was it for me in Arizona after that. And then the league kind of folded up in 2009, I believe, 2009. And then in 2010, I became the president of the Chicago Rush. And which, again, was a great organization, but the ownership was starting to slip there. And I did that for a year, and then I became a high school coach in Chicago for 8 years after that. And I've been kind of retired, sort of retired. I'm a senior draft analyst and scout for Our Lads, which is a magazine that comes out every year right before the NFL draft. And I evaluate the offensive linemen and the tight ends for the magazine. So now I'm a writer after all that. So it's been a really great career for me.
Good. So in the early days, were you guys looking at kind of like a model? Like, were you looking at like NFL as kind of like a model organization, or was it just like, okay, we're just gonna build this thing by trial and error? Like, I guess, what was kind of the thought process in the early days?
Well, we thought that first year in '87, the preview season, we had Mouse Davis oversaw the personnel stuff, the coaching, and the players for the league. And Joe Herring oversaw the defense. But Mouse was one of the most innovative guys in football. He was a run and shoot guy. He was at Portland State for a long time, and Neil Lomax played for him. So Mouse was really a very well-known guy. He gave the league a lot of credibility. And so we were able to develop an offensive style of play for the league, which really, if you were doing what you're supposed to do, it should be a score almost every time, which it wound up being. And that was really our style of play, was going to be score a lot of points. If you get a stop or two in a game, you probably should win the game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty tough to see a coach sitting around beating his chest about, we got 2 stops, we're the best defense. But that's really what it was,
Mm-hmm.
So that was really the style of play. Now, we had to iron out some other things. The first year we played with 16 players, and we only had 16 players for practice. Now you got to remember, 2 of those guys are quarterbacks, and one of them's a kicker.
Mm-hmm.
So you got a kicker snapping the ball in practice. Tough to get a good look with the kicker snapping the ball, and your one of your quarterbacks. So you had it was probably a lot more like pro football is today, with helmets and shorts running around in practice than really what you needed for Iron Man football. And, back then, you were a fullback, you were a linebacker. So almost every play, that linebacker's blitzing, and that fullback's picking them up. And it's the gutsiest position in all sports, I think, to have those guys just battering ram into each other all game long. And Billy Stone, who played for me in that first 2 years, he was the first ever Iron Man of the Year. He was our fullback in Chicago. And Billy was from Adams State in Colorado. And he was in camp with the Rams, and just a tough kid. And Osei Lewis was his counterpart there also. And Osei wound up being a great coach. He was at Vanderbilt and Oregon State. He'd been to a lot of UTEP, been to a lot of different places. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, but a real good friend forever. And so those 2 guys were my guys that I was able to coach my first year in the league. And you get spoiled after dealing with those guys.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, when you, let's talk about what it took to kind of run the organization when you ended up at Arizona. What were some of the things you were looking into? Like, this is what I need to put this organization on top, kind of deal. What was your recipe?
I was lucky. I was the executive of the year 3 times. It wasn't because I was some great executive, okay? It was because, we had the Phoenix Suns marketing department, and we had the Phoenix Suns staff, and they were out there, and it was the off season for the NBA back then. So, and that was before we moved the league to February or whatever. So, they were out there, and we had 15, 20 restaurants that the players were able to go eat at every night. We had, everything was brand new out here. So we had, brand new apartment complexes, fully furnished. and two players generally lived there, and eventually, as we got a little more sophisticated, we even let wives come and live with the players, which was great. It was great for them. But so my job really was pretty much the personnel stuff, and Danny White was a great name. Back just before the Rattlers started, there was no Arizona Cardinals. So the Cowboys were everybody's team back then, and Danny was a starting quarterback for the Cowboys. I mean, that's a pretty big deal, and I didn't realize it. And I had lunch with Danny a couple weeks ago, and I talked to him about this. I had no idea, what it meant to be Danny White. I just say, look, go coach your team. And that wasn't the way it was. So we were able to. And he had some definite opinions on personnel, which he got from Frank Cush when he was at Arizona State and Tom Landry when he was with the Cowboys. So we didn't all agree with him, and certainly I didn't. But I'll tell you one thing, he was pretty darn good at what he did. And then we started adding guys, like I mentioned. So Bonner was already here, and Hunky was already here. And then we started adding guys like Randy Gatewood and Bob McMillan and Mark Tucker. All of a sudden, I think Bonner might have gone 3 seasons without getting sacked. I mean, that's insane. Now, part of it was because he was big lefty and just got back there and just fired it, Mm-hmm. But we were pretty good up front too. So, and the level of play in the league. Orlando was good, Tampa was good, and then a little bit later, a couple of years later, San Jose came in, and they were good, and they had good coaching also, and they really became our rival, and they just did a great job.
Kind of speak on that rivalry. That how important, how big was that rivalry you guys had with San Jose?
Well, it was bitter, Originally, I helped set up their franchise. I was still in the league office in '95, and then Terry Malley and Darren Arbette were able to move players around, and they had great practice facilities. Like they patterned their organization after Arizona to a point, and then you look at the guys that they've had. So they were, and they got the better of us. In one Arena Bowl, I think they had us shut out in the middle of the third quarter still. That was crazy. And then they beat us in an Arena Bowl on the last play of the game also. So we had a good rivalry. As the years go on, you earn their respect. And, Terry Malley, I think, was just a class guy all the way around. And Darren was just, Darren grew into his role, I think, and he had some older coaches that helped him grow into it. And then, he is what he is. He's an all-time great coach. Actually, we went into the Hall of Fame together the same year. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But
so
yes, it was. You knew when you were playing San Jose, that's for sure.
Yeah, they're always, granted, I came many years later, but we're looking up to, like the era before, my time in Orlando. You kind of looked up to the San Jose's and the Arizonas. Like you looked at, when I played against Arizona and San Jose, it was almost like you're playing against some of the guys you kind of looked up to. And you're like, oh man, that's hunky. Okay. And I remember I tried to Tucker introduced me to how to play against those quick passes. I think I didn't know no better. I think I jumped up and Tucker slammed me on my head, and I was like, oh, I got to make sure I get a stiff arm as I'm jumping up next time. I always remember that. That was my first time playing against Arizona. And I just jumped up. I didn't get a hand on him. Yeah, I learned that lesson.
He's a pretty big guy still, by the way.
Yes, he was.
He's a little lighter now. He's about 310. So
That's funny. Literally, he introduced me to how to play against that because you wasn't getting to Bonner.
No,
You were happy to get a hand on him. If you were able to slap his shoulder pad or fall at his feet, and he stepped back a little bit, you were like, yes. So, but yeah, that's cool. So, yeah. So let's talk about when you transition, to Chicago, and then what was your next step? What were you doing after that time in Chicago?
well, after I left the Rush, I became the head coach at a private school in Chicago, Fenwick High School in Oak Park. And you might not know about the school, but you probably know one of its alums was Johnny Latner, who won the Heisman Trophy for Notre Dame. And I coached 6 of his grandsons there. And one of them is still playing in the NFL, Robert Spillane, who last year was with the Raiders and just signed the free agent deal with New England a couple weeks ago. But Robert he was a running back for me, and he's an NFL linebacker. Mm-hmm. So that shows how stubborn I am. So, but it was really a great bunch of kids there, and it was good to be around the kids. I can't say much more for anybody else around there, but it was the kids are still in contact with me, which is really important to me, and I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm. So you transitioned into coaching high school, and now you're back in Arizona. You said.
I'm in Arizona. I'm in Scottsdale, and my 2 grandsons are outside the door screaming. And but I'm doing this Our Lads writing and evaluation, and I spent a lot of time evaluating. I wound up writing up about 80 college players, but out of the guys I wrote up, I had 25 guys get drafted in the first 3 rounds. So I'm really proud of that. You got to find victories somewhere when you're not on the field. So I found my victories, and I watched your show, and I saw Clint and I saw Jay, and I haven't seen Rashid's yet, but I will. And I got to tell you, you had 2 of the great ones. I guess I overlooked. I was in Dallas for a summer. And so they asked me to come in and take a look at why things were going bad for the vigilantes. And so we figured that out. And then we hired Clint to come in and be the coach the next year, but I was going to leave. And so Clint wound up doing that. I think it was a good career move for him. And then, Jay, I've always had Jay's got a real unique sense of humor. He's a great guy. And we probably didn't become as close as we probably should have been, but I really have a lot of respect for him. And then obviously his career took off, and I'm happy for him. And he's doing a lot of whatever he does with picking games and telling people who to bet and that stuff. So I knew he liked to gamble a little bit. We had a casino here in Arizona that I think he spent a little time at before we played them one year. So, but you've had some good people on the show, and I hope I don't ruin your reputation.
No, you're doing pretty good. So that's not a concern. So I appreciate you coming on and giving some insight from your perspective, because some of the guys that I speak to, they're my era or maybe a little bit before me, and so they don't know all the details of what it took to help build this game. And so having you on kind of helps shed a light on some of those things. You have a knowledge that not many people have.
Well, I don't know if it's a knowledge or if I've been to the school of hard knocks, and but there were so many valuable experiences for me. There was a time when the league looked like it was going to go away because the players were trying to negotiate a new contract for finances, and I was on the negotiating committee for a collective bargaining agreement. And, we were in the battle with James Barron and those guys and, trying to do the right thing. And I was always, or in my mind, I was always in favor of helping the players because I knew they were building the league on their backs. And so I really believe they need to be taken care of. But I also need to believe that we need to keep the league going. And and if the owners are losing so much money because of guaranteed money, well, there's going to be nothing tomorrow. And that was like with the Ironman football that went away, and a lot of people want to blame Bon Jovi or blame John Elway, but it was, we thought the NFL was going to step up and take the league over. And to have players playing on one side of the ball was an easy way to get that accomplished. And, Jerry Jones owned Dallas at the time, and Tom Benson owned New Orleans. And so, there's so many stories that, I could tell you. I could tell you that, Casey Wasserman, who's heading up the Los Angeles Olympics coming up here soon, and he was the owner of the LA Avengers, and myself and a couple other guys, we helped keep the league afloat for a little bit of a short time with guaranteed salaries. This is the league minimum. And the league minimum was light years above, what guys were making. And originally we were trying to just get their benefits, for guys and their families. Our players were becoming more sophisticated, okay, and we needed to come along with them as ownership.
So, is there any insight? You spoke on that was always a big thing in my time because it was when I ended up going to Chicago and playing out there. That's when Iron Man was they got rid of Iron Man. So you kind of shed some light on that whole transition. Do you have any insight on when the league kind of went down in 2000, 2009? That was another part, during my time. Cause I guess in talking to guys like Hunky and all, they're like, yeah, because I always remember Hunky telling me this, like when you hit 32, that's going to be your best season. And right when that, the next season would have been, I would have hit 32. And so, I was like, my career was cut short, not necessarily because of injury, just because of how things went. But do you have any insight on that transition when the league kind of went down to when they kind of came back up, or came back into things?
Well, what happened was they had to reorganize the league because they couldn't come back as the entity that was the Arena Football League because they'd have gotten sued. They were going to get sued. And this way, it made a clear division between them. And I wasn't involved. I couldn't get back in. They didn't want me anymore. And, there was a guy in Orlando who was an owner there. And, he didn't like me. And I really didn't care for him either. So I went my way. I was angry. And then Dallas called me to come out during that first year they came back, and it was different. I got a call from Tim Markham, and Tim had told me, hey, man, you don't want to come back. This is not like what it used to be. And I didn't believe him, and it was like it used to be. And I feel bad. I feel bad for you because, it was something to go out there on Sundays on NBC and play in front of 10, 12,000 people.
Yes.
And it was like we were the big time of indoor football. Mm-hmm. We weren't the NFL. We should have never wanted to be the NFL, but we needed to be the best at arena football.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got about 12 leagues, and they got all these different leagues, and the Indoor Football League appears to be doing very well, and which is great. But back then it was us, and then we started AF2. And not everybody was behind AF2, but they did a great job of putting it together and getting those smaller cities going. And I know part of your career was spent there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's great. And I thought it was, in hindsight, it was a great idea.
Mm-hmm. I definitely like that whole idea AF2, because when you're testing out all the smaller markets, and maybe they can grow into something like who was it, Spokane, when they kind of grew into a bigger from AF2 to AF1 or whatever you want to say.
For sure.
So that ended up being a great thing. How about I guess kind of your thoughts on the state of indoor ball now with all the leagues? You kind of started to talk about it, but kind of what's your thought process from seeing it, arena from its infancy, their beginning stages, to what the state of arena football is now with all the leagues? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think it's more diluted, and I really don't know I think the big part of it is always going to be money. Players are going to go where the money is. If the Arena Football League is paying the most money, they're going to get the best players. But I also know that the IFL, they're drawing a little bit better now, so that I'm sure they're able to pay a little bit better, maybe under the table better. Which that's always been the mystery of all indoor football, is how much are you really getting paid, And we were able to keep Gatewood, Hunky, and Bonner, and everybody always wanted them, but we were able to pay them, and they were worth it. They did anything in the community we needed. They always represented themselves as the quality people they were, and the organization. And it was easy to be an executive for that organization when you had those kind of guys. So, and I don't know about all. There's just so many of them. Mm-hmm. I watch an IFL game every now and then because we have a team here in Arizona, and Kevin Guy is coaching the Rattlers and doing a good job there. But I haven't really gotten into the AFL this season as of yet, because they're not as readily available to watch the games anymore. Used to be you could pick them up on wherever, on YouTube, or now I can't even do that.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's obviously the first thing you got to do all the time is get a TV contract. And everybody's, who's going to pay? Well, you don't need a TV contract to pay you as much as you need a TV contract for exposure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that.
Yeah. So, but that's one thing now. It's and seeing everything is so many. Yeah, definitely. There's so many leagues, and you're trying to find, because everybody was on YouTube. I was with the Preds like the last 5 years, and so seeing how things are bouncing around and growing and evolving, or whatever the case may be, we were all on YouTube at one point in time, all the leagues. And so now everybody's trying different platforms, and some of the platforms are free. Some of them don't work on your phone, but they work on a laptop, and it's definitely not as accessible as it once was, when you could just turn on the TV on NBC and watch, our games. And that was,
well, yeah. And people think, well, if we're on YouTube, people aren't going to come to the game because they go watch it at home. And that's not the case, I think, for arena football fans. They come to the games because it's entertaining. It's rock and roll football. It's, there's a lot going on. There's stuff on the field, stuff in the stand. So it doesn't matter if it's on TV or not. For the ownership. Mm-hmm. The ownership needs to expose the game, and people are still going to come to the game.
Okay. So yeah, but that's like, this, like I said, it's I definitely want to always have you on to shed some light. Like I said, my opinion only gets you so far, and my knowledge of the game will only get you
Mine
so
too, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen more than triple what I've seen and what I know. You know what I mean? What I don't know, what I haven't seen, I've heard from people, from talking to Jay, from talking to Coach Ho, and a couple guys like that. I'm blessed to have access to those guys to teach me some things. You know what I mean? So. But definitely you come with another wealth of knowledge that I'm a sponge. I like I like to learn, and I like to find out different things, and everything goes as planned and moves forward, and I got knowledge that can help me out, or I have knowledge that I can help somebody else out if they ask me a question, and I may take some of the nuggets that you gave me and share with them, and they're like, "Oh man, you're so smart." Nah, I just know people.
Well, 22 or 23 years is a long time to spend doing something. But it was awesome. I mean, like I said, I've been around some great football people, close to and from a distance. And there's a thing on Facebook today about Babe Pirelli. And Babe was one of the original coaches in this league and a great guy. And, he was University of Kentucky quarterback and set all kinds of records, and sweet Kentucky Babe. And I got a whole list of guys that were legendary that passed away that were part of this league. Guys like Lou Saban, he used to be the coach of the Denver Broncos. And we've been very, very lucky, and I've been very lucky to be part of it. That's for sure.
All right. So I don't want to hold you up too much longer, but I always kind of close out with you giving, my guests giving out advice. So for you, is there anything you'd like to, any advice you want to give to people who kind of, it could be the players looking to continue to play, or kind of give advice to people who are on the fence about the indoor game, looking to play the indoor game, but they don't know everything? I don't know. The best advice that you can give to anyone that pertains to this indoor and arena game.
Well, it's funny because with the arena game, you don't know who to call anymore. As we were talking before we went on the air, call people, you don't get a call back. So you got to make sure you're calling the right person. But I would tell players, just keep your head down and do what got you there. If you think you're good enough to play, and don't look at it as a step down. It's a chance to play football, and it'll grab a hold of you real quick if you're not paying attention. And so with the lenient rules as far as substitution, so if you're a DB, get out there and cover people all over the place. If you're a receiver, be a high motion receiver, and if you're a lineman, be a two-way lineman. Just learn how to play the game, and it's the most fun football you'll play in your life. I mean, if I heard it once, I heard it a bunch of times from players like, this is the most fun I've had since I was in high school. And that's quite a statement, because everybody has fond high school memories of when they were a player. And make sure that people do what they tell you they're going to do. If the ownership is we're going to do this, we're going to feed you, we're going to do that, make sure it's done. And don't take a back seat to that. And just don't hang on just to hang on. And in most cases, people appreciate your honesty, and they'll do well by you, because there's a lot of good people in indoor football, arena football, and just make sure that you don't let them take you down primrose lane. That's all.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, again, appreciate you coming on and, sharing your knowledge and, helping us all out, giving you your perspective is very valuable to myself and people who are listening that you don't know. When they check your resume, they're gonna, what comes out of your mouth is important, and it'll shed some light on some things that they didn't know, were important, or things that they didn't know that they want, that they you needed to hear this kind of deal. So, but again, appreciate your time, appreciate you coming on and speaking with me and kind of sharing your story.
I appreciate you listening. Thank you very much.
No problem. So, again, I don't hold you up, but appreciate you coming on, and you have a good night.
All right, EJ, take care now.
Thanks.